Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathleen Baird-Murray, and I'm a contributing beauty editor at British Vogue. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's 5 Days of Wellness event in partnership with Fitbit. Now, I wouldn't normally start an event like this by revealing how old I am, even though it's not such a big secret as I talk about it often, but I'm 52, and the reason age is so upfront and out there tonight is because the subject of our panel is how to optimize your body and mind at every age. And for once, when it comes to aging, we're not talking about eradicating fine lines and wrinkles, thank goodness, but how we can eradicate the misconceptions about aging and perhaps learn a little more about how we can prepare for our futures purposefully and holistically. Before we start discussing this with our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, I just wanted to highlight how you can get involved too. We love to try and keep these webinars as interactive as possible, so please do send in your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will be answering the most asked questions of the evening at the end of the panel discussion. We also have a competition tonight for one lucky attendee to win a Fitbit Sense. I think this is such an interesting tool that bridges the gap between fitness and wellness. And I'm very much aware that in the 2 weeks or so I've been trialing it, I have only really skimmed the top of the iceberg when it comes to finding out all it can do, which is pretty much everything from measuring your skin temperature, monitoring sleep patterns, and managing stress. So if you'd like to win one, all you need to do is post an Instagram story and include rather a key learning, like something you've picked up from listening to us today, and tag British Vogue at British Vogue and at Fitbit UK _Ireland, and use our hashtag 5 Days of Vogue. And now on to the bit we've all been waiting for, when we get to meet our incredible panel of experts. Sadly, Jane Haynes, our panel psychotherapist, was unable to join us tonight, but allow me to introduce you to Rosemary Ferguson, British Vogue contributing editor and nutritionist. Hello. Dr Anita Mitra, also known as Gynae Geek, who is an NHS doctor based in London and working in obstetrics and gynaecology. And Sue Campbell, Baroness Campbell of Loughborough, who has been a champion of women's sports throughout her distinguished career. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for helping us unravel this mysterious and beautiful thing we call aging. And I'd like to start by defining what we really mean when we're talking about aging, because it's such a sort of nebulous thing, isn't it? It is technically, I believe, the period roughly from 40 onwards when our bodies and minds definitely start to shift. And we go from perimenopause to menopause to suddenly being old, or if we're feeling kind in the way we talk about ourselves, we might call it being mature, although, you know, there's lots of mature people out there, myself included. But let's look at what aging means from the varying perspectives of our panel. And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Anita Mitra. What's the sort of, with your experience as an NHS doctor practicing in obstetrics and gynecology, can you explain exactly what is going on in our bodies when we talk about aging?
Yeah, so when we talk about aging, I think the thing that is really easy for us to quantify is the menopause. And so the menopause is what we call a retrospective diagnosis. So you can only diagnose it when it's actually happened. And so menopause means the first day of 12 months of no periods when they've stopped forever. So the average age of that's about 51 years, and that hasn't really changed for centuries. But we're all living longer, so we're spending a lot longer in the menopause. Now, the period leading up to the menopause is called the perimenopause, and this is when the ovaries really start to lose function. Okay, so the menopause happens essentially because our ovaries have run out of eggs. And when we run out of eggs, we're not having the same signals that go to our brain, because it's really important to understand that the ovaries are really heavily connected to so many other areas in the body, particularly the brain, the adrenal glands as well, really, really important, but so many other parts of the body. And so when the ovaries stop functioning, then we'll often notice that our periods become irregular, and then eventually they will stop completely. But in that phase where that's happening, there are huge changes in our body, because the ovaries are not just, pumping out eggs and estrogen. Those hormones are acting everywhere in our bodies. And so we often associate the menopause with night sweats and dry vaginas, but it's much more than that. And there are so many other subtle symptoms that I think people are not really aware of, and maybe are not seeking help because they're not really sure what's exactly going on. And personally, I think things that I find really common that often aren't really brought up are things like huge change in sleep. Also, lots of problems with, for example, anxiety, changing concentration, and then things like looking at pelvic organ prolapse, urinary incontinence. These are all related. And so while getting older and period stopping is inevitable, we don't necessarily have to suffer with these symptoms. And I think the first thing is just to be aware of all these changes that can happen in our bodies.
It is, I mean, it's quite daunting. I can imagine if you're not in perimenopause or menopause and you've, I don't know, somehow logged in, you got the wrong day. Maybe you were like hoping for the talk on motherhood that Jess did so brilliantly on Tuesday. It must be pretty scary listening to this, because you're thinking pelvic floor relapse, like, you know, what is that, you know, or as you say, the symptoms are so many that we kind of, I think also we sort of skip through a lot of them, don't we? We just kind of assume it's something we have to just put up with. And often many of them are. I mean, you know, I've been trying to fix migraines, I think probably since I was about 14. So it's sort of, we do just kind of have to put up with a lot of stuff, but there are, perhaps is talking about them constructive, do you think? Does it mean that we find different ways to treat them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just don't think that we're taught about the menopause. And you know, I think that you get taught in school about maybe vaguely what a period is. I mean, my education was terrible. I thought that a period was an egg cracking and the contents coming out of your vagina. Kind of ironic that I talk about them every day and I do understand quite a lot more about
Maybe
them.
that's why you do.
You get taught that you have these periods, and then you get taught that, you know, if you have sex, you'll probably get pregnant, and then you go through the rest of your life, and then suddenly your periods stop, and then you've got this whole new phenomenon. And I think most people, you know, when they probably learn about the menopause, maybe from their mum, and you often hear about people talking about arguing with their mums because they want the heating on, or their mums flinging the windows open. But again, you know, the really classic symptoms of the menopause. And we were just talking off camera earlier about how, you know, my own mother experienced terrible headaches with her menopause, and this wasn't something that she was particularly aware of. And it tends to be, you know, when you get that sort of low estrogen phase right before your period, that's often when people get what we call a menstrual migraine. So it's often related to a lack of estrogen. And they may be the people who actually are going to get you know, worsen migraines with the menopause. And again, you know, some people, we don't really understand why, but some people are just a little bit more sensitive to hormone fluctuations. So there are subsets of people who, for example, get really terrible PMS. Some people get something called PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a really, really distressing thing. And so this group of people, and also possibly people who get postnatal depression, maybe are a population who are a little bit more sensitive to those fluctuations in hormones and may potentially suffer a little bit more with menopause. But certainly it's not isolated to those people. And, you know, I think just sometimes knowing that actually you're going through something that somebody else is going through and that you're not going crazy, that's the first step in dealing with this. Sometimes people just need to learn more about what's going on and learn that actually it's normal. And, you know, normal again doesn't mean that you have to put up with it, but, you know, learning that this is actually a thing, I think, you know, that's where education is so, so important.
I'm going to come back to you obviously a bit later. We'll be talking again, for anyone who's just heard that long list of problems, there are things you can do, and we will be talking about the things you can do. But I just wanted to ask Rosemary. Rosemary's our resident nutritionist on our panel. Rosemary, how does aging impact our bodies and our mental health from a sort of a nutritional perspective? Like, what are we losing as we get older? Or because it's usually losing, maybe it's things that we're gaining as well.
So yeah, so I mean, I think, so when you said aging, we start at 40, from 40, we're actually aging from the day we're born. Like, you know, we're all changing everything, and it's an inevitable process. And the thing that we talk about aging is because from about 40, we start to see it on our face a lot of the time, or our energy is low. So I suppose, and you know, and aging is just that our cells and their ability and efficiency start to become not as efficient, in simple terms. And I suppose the thing that I feel very strongly about is that we put ourselves under a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of things that create aging, like pollution, stress, racing around 50 miles an hour, all those things. We're asking our bodies to do a lot, and over time our bodies become less able to do those because what's come sort of down to chromosomes, telomeres, DNA, all those things start to sort of malfunction a little bit, you know, they're tired. So there are things that we can definitely do. As you say, there are things we can do to encourage their health and keep them working as well as they can. So it's not all bad, but I definitely think I need to fly a flag for everybody, because we all do far too much. Actually, we all try and do too much, and the lives we lead now, we're asking ourselves to do more than we have ever done before, and that puts a lot of stress on the body. And then there's this thing, my favorite, it's a very nutrition thing to say, is inflammaging, you know, which is about inflammation, and that inflammation drives you know, problems at a cellular level. And so then our body ages because there is inflammation and things aren't dealt with, and you know, they're not renewing as quickly. And you know, and also we do use nutrients, we use nutrients faster, but also we stop making them, you know, things like Q10 and glutathione, they all stop being made quite so well as we get older.
Sue, your whole career has been dedicated to sports, and particularly for women, where you've obviously, you know, you're known for transforming the face of women's football. But what is your experience of women getting older with regards to their physical strength, and why, and this might be an obvious question, why is that important?
Well, as the most mature, as you would call it,
So much
I've experienced it all, I think. I mean, I'm now 72, and I am pretty certain that the reason I still can do what I'm doing is I kept myself physically fit throughout my life. That doesn't mean I go to the gym 4 times a week. It doesn't mean I'm still playing hockey or netball, but it does mean as I've aged, I've continued to do 2 of the most important things as you age is flexibility and strength. Those are 2 really, really important things. Why? Because I want to remain mobile for as long as I can, because I value my independence. And one of the things that happens as people get much older is that they start to lose strength. You'll see people push themselves out of an armchair or need help to get up. The minute that starts to happen, you're losing a degree of independence. And the other part that you really need to work on all the time is flexibility. So, you know, I don't do any sport, as you would call it now, at all. I do walk twice a day with my dogs because they demand it. And I think we need to make sure as we get older, we adjust as to what our bodies will actually allow us to do. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be taking daily if we can, but certainly 3 times a week, some form of physical activity. Even if that's walking to the bus stop or walking back from the shops, probably not back from the shops, down to the shops, you don't want to be carrying the heavy bags. But you want to be really thinking, you know, gardening, you know, you have to really think about how can I remain physically active? And I think that's very important. And it's not just important for you physically. I think it's massively important for your mental wellness and emotional wellness. So, you know, if I did not do what I do, I certainly couldn't be working as I am 9 hours a day, you know, at the Football Association, working on women's football. But being physically well allows me to be mentally well and allows me to stay focused. Whether I've done enough around flexibility is a question I would ask myself. And I think we should be very clear that those, as you get older, those are the 2 big things. Keep yourself physically active, but strong enough to get up out of a chair without any assistance, and flexible so that you can retain that movement. And I think if you do that, I think you stay strong mentally and flexible mentally as well.
Can I ask you, what, apart from walking, do you do other forms of, you said flexibility and strength, so which box is that ticking, the walking, the
I do a lot of gardening.
Oh yes, okay.
I'll be busy in the garden at the weekends, and that will involve me bending. It will involve me carrying bags of leaves at the moment, or you know, it will involve me doing some weight training as I carry things around the garden. It involves me doing a lot of bending and movement. I go swimming, which is a great exercise for anybody as you get older. It's both strength, but it's also, you know, the water holds your body weight, so it's not as stressful on your joints as you get a little bit older. So I think you have to find the thing you enjoy doing. I don't think it's, one exercise doesn't suit everybody. But I know that on those hourly walks I do in the mornings, now getting dark as I walk, which is not so much fun. But those morning walks are a very special time, not just for me physically, but for me to relax, think about the day, prepare, reflect. I find myself more creative when I'm moving than when I'm sitting. So if I've got a problem to solve, or I want to find a creative solution to something, if I start to physically, and that might just be me, but I think it's also a lot of people, and you start to physically move, there's something about it that allows that clarity of thinking, and that innovative kind of brain that works, that creative brain. So I think it's really important, and I think we underestimate how important it is in our lives.
I agree. And I think apart from anything else, when I wake up in the morning, if I stay in bed too long, the anxiety that is sort of endemic with this sort of age seems to kick in. And so I sort of start off with a tiny problem, and then within 5 minutes it's become the end of the world. So I almost have to jump up and get out and walk the dog before that whole period kicks in. It's,
Yeah, well, I think the mind is, we know something about the mind, but we don't know enough about the mind and all that it controls, and all that we can, and the way we can control it. And I think, worry is I think a lot worse when you're on your own with time. But something about physically moving, something about getting moving, allows that worry to somehow get into perspective.
Absolutely. I'm going to get a little personal now, because we have a broad range of ages on this panel. And I want to ask everyone what their experiences have been of getting older. So Sue, let's start with you, because you mentioned you are 72. I mean, what's it been like getting older, from generally speaking? Big question. It's funny, I feel like we don't often talk about it. We don't really.
No, I think we do. We try and hide from it a little bit.
We do, away from it.
Yeah. Look, I am I was the inevitable sporty child. I was probably, my parents said the only time I came in was when they banged a spoon on a plate. I was outside. I was feral, really. So I was outside, and I was either climbing a tree or falling out of a tree or playing football with the boys next door or whatever it was. So my life has been very defined by my movement. When I was at school, I wasn't a particularly academically good kid because I couldn't learn sitting still. I found sitting still really tough. I learned kinesthetically. So if you wanted to get me to do something, so as soon as I got to chemistry, where we could blow things up, I was brilliant because I was physically involved in it, or anything that engaged me in physically being part of it, I was really good at it. So getting old has been tough because all that physicality slowly starts to leave you. And I don't like it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I've battled with myself a bit around having to accept certain limitations on what I can do. I was still playing field hockey when I was 60. I was still playing squash when I was 65.
Wow.
I was paying a heavy price the day after for playing anything like that because my body did not want to do it, but I didn't want to let go of it. And I guess the last few years I've become much more comfortable with myself, and I've adjusted to what is healthy for me, what keeps me alive and happy and healthy. And I've said it's walking, gardening, but the thing that's been the most difficult is redefining who Sue Campbell is, because she can't express herself by being this physical creature, because that's what she's been all her life. So, a lot of who I am has been defined by what I could physically do. So I've had to redefine what is success for me when I can physically do things. So it's not an easy process, but you have to work at it. And, you have to realize that every day you have when you're my age is a blessing. And you have to say, I'm going to make the most of today. Doesn't matter whether I'm slightly more limited in my movement or can't do what I want to do, that every day is a blessing, and you have to grab it with both hands and make the most of it.
It's really interesting, isn't it? That point about how you define yourself change, it does actually change, you know, through life in some ways, whatever you do, whether you have a, you know, a prominent career as a sportswoman like yourself, or, you know, Rosemary, you were a model when you started out, and you still are, but you, well, I don't know if you still are, but you still could be. And, you know, now you have a career as a nutritionist. But that sort of sense of things changing all the time. I mean, Rosemary, have you, you know, you're still obviously very young. What are your experiences of getting older?
Well, I'm 45 now, still very young.
Lucky woman.
I turned 21 yesterday, and that's the single most aging thing that's happened to me. And so I am actually going to tell her to start lying about her age and to say that she, because
Yes, I think that's a good plan.
21-year-old, you are of a certain age. But yeah, so actually it's interesting when you think about aging, because it is, your whole life is changing, and actually going from modeling to a job, you know, because I was a model very young, you're very aware of how you look, not in a negative. I didn't ever find modeling a negative thing for me, you know, but you do sort of, you know, we were laughing about your knees and the way that they start creeping down, and my boobs, I do not have very, but they're like raindrops falling down. We were like, you know, so things like that, you start sort of, and I suppose that vanity is a challenge at times, you know, sometimes you have to go, and you know, and you know what I say, my mantra when I sort of do get a little bit broadsided by something that upsets me like that, I just think I want to grow old gracefully. Yes, I don't mind a little bit of help, and I don't mind trying to you know, hold things back a little bit, but I do think growing old gracefully is something that is, when I see women who have done it gracefully, I always admire them. So that's something, you know, and going from, you know, the thing about being a model is that there are a lot of photographs of you when you were younger, knocking around, and they turn up quite a lot, and you're like, okay, so that looks exactly like my 15-year-old daughter.
Yes,
you know,
and
so
that's quite nice.
Yeah, it is. It is, but it does, you know, so I suppose then it makes you, but as you said, Sue, I don't feel any different. And actually, I think, you know, I'd say physically, I'm fitter now than I was then. I feel better now than I did then. So yes, actually aging to me, I really love being in my 40s. I loved being in my 30s. And you know, at the moment, I'm kind of like, actually, I'm really happy where I am. And I, you know, physically, I am definitely fitter. Like I ran a marathon last year, and you know, which, yeah, it's my second marathon. And actually, considering the COVID restrictions now, I was talking to a friend who ran it with me, and we were so grateful that we got to do it, because it might be some time before people can do that again. So, but you know, but I just mean, you know, I definitely feel like I've got more stamina. I feel more capable, and I think I mean, apart from the physical signs of aging, it's interesting, isn't it, how you can feel stronger and more robust. I definitely feel stronger and more robust the older I get at the moment. So, you know, so far, so, you know.
Anita, what about you? I mean, you're, you know, as a doctor, you're seeing everybody's experiences of aging from birth to death. What's it like for you personally?
Well, I suppose I'm probably the most fraudulent here because I'm 35, but I do obviously
Get her off.
I do have the pleasure of looking after people literally from the very first day they're born until, you know, the last few days. But I would certainly say that, you know, very much touching on what Rosemary and Sue have both really said. So, you know, as Rosemary said, we're all aging all the time. And now, so it's 10 years since I became a doctor. And for example, when I'm doing night shifts now, I really feel it. And, you know, 10 years ago, I would like go to the gym when I got home, and then I would be like running all over the place, and I would sleep a little bit. And now I'm like, right, home, bed. And it's really interesting because, you know, people always sort of ask me, well, you know, what should I do to when I get older? And it's like, no, it's not what you're going to do when you get older. It's what you're going to do now, because we're very much preparing our bodies for being aging, And, you know, getting us through all the things that we want to do, as Sue mentioned. It's so important to build this strong body, because you've got one body for your whole life. And although I'm a doctor, and of course, you know, we prescribe medications, we perform operations, but I very much believe in, you know, taking things back to the basics. You can't run a Ferrari if you're treating it like a banged up, you know, Robin Reliant. You've really got to sleep properly, and that's something that I feel more and more now with doing these long shifts. And you know, you've got to fuel your body well. And you know, you can't be going out, and not that any of us can these days, but you cannot be going out and getting drunk however many nights a week, not sleeping, and then thinking, well, why do I feel and look,
why do I not feel great? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's very much something that I think it has to be something you do from a young age, to really remember that this is the body that's going to take you right to the end.
Do you practice what you preach about the sleep? I mean, I'm curious as to what everybody is taking from their professional lives into their personal lives when it comes to aging. Anita, obviously you mentioned lack of sleep and taking care of yourself.
I mean, sleep is always probably the worst thing for me, but when I can sleep, I really make sure that I do. Because I just need to be really awake and on my game for my patients when I'm at work. And for example, people always ask me, well, how do you exercise? Well, I find time because I love it and I want to do it to keep my body strong. But for example, when I'm on night shifts, I don't go to the gym, I don't exercise, because I need to make sure that when I'm up all night operating, I've got lots of energy and I'm ready for whatever's going to happen. But I'll make sure that I do prioritize that kind of thing, because I know that it makes me feel good, both physically and mentally. And I think that's something that we need to really reinforce with people, that I think particularly in younger women, often exercise is thought of as something that is all about looking good in a bikini, and we really need to get away from that. And we need to really emphasize the fact that exercise is how you build a strong body, strong bones, strong muscles, that's going to carry you through.
Rosemary, what's the one thing that, with your sort of nutritionist hat on, would you think we should all be doing now?
What, for just for general health? Or
yes, just like to help us as we get older, to give us this nutritional support that we need so that our bodies can do what they have to do, and hopefully get us out the other end feeling flexible, strong, and all those things.
Do you know what I really believe in? I really believe that I really believe that it's not rocket science, nutrition. B, I believe a little bit of everything, a bit of moderation. If you want to have a glass of wine, have a glass of wine, you know, and the 80-20, actually, that's what's really come home to me actually over the corona times, because everybody's like this, you know, I'm like 80% of the time do what you can do, what we should do, which is, you know, and this, I mean, it's not rocket science, it's eat more fruit, eat more vegetables, eat whole foods, eat, you know, try and get some wild fish into your diet, eat lean protein, eat complex carbohydrate. I mean, it's really straightforward. Make sure you're hydrated. And then 20% of the time, do what, you know, whatever you want, because it's good for your soul. And we're more than just I mean, I always say that your food is your fuel and your body is your fuel tank, but also emotions, and we're far more complicated than just you know, what we put in our mouths. But I do think that, you know, I think people, one of my bugbears with nutrition is that people hold it up as this complex, elite, you know, sort of unattainable goal, and actually it's not. We can all eat really well. I think, you know, I think an anti-inflammatory diet is really key to you know, and things like antioxidants, which are just, you know, brightly coloured fruit and veg, you know, and we want to have good fats, so they're anti-inflammatory, you know, so that is what I would do. And I definitely, that's how I eat the majority of the time. But I have a donut every now and then. Actually, I don't actually like donuts that much, but my kids do. But, you know, I'll have a bag of crisps or whatever it is.
Love a bag of crisps.
I love a bag. I mean, do you know what the British do really well is we make a really good bag of crisps.
We do. We make a really good bag of crisps. Yeah. Now, I want to ask you also whether you've, all of you actually, whether you've got any sort of tips or gadgets or tools that will help women generally get through the menopause. I mean, I've been, it's quite interesting actually, you know, we're in partnership for this with Fitbit, and I've been trialing this Fitbit Sense. And what's really interesting about it is I thought my problem was lack of sleep, but apparently I've been getting almost 8 hours sleep a night, which means I can't moan about not having any sleep anymore, which is actually quite annoying, but anyway, we'll part that. But it did highlight the fact that, for example, my stress levels are quite high, so clearly I'm not handling that so well. I'm also not walking enough. I'm, you know, probably hitting maybe 6,000 to 8,000 steps a day, even with the dog. So I was a bit disappointed about that. You're meant to be getting 10,000, so it's quite interesting. But I mean, Sue, for example, what did you find was the thing, or what is the thing that will help women, generally speaking? Is there a tool or a tip or something useful that will just help us as we, you know, go through this period of our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on menopause. It's so long ago, I can hardly remember.
Well, that's a good tip, I suppose. This too shall pass.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think we think of exercise or sport as something which requires you to go somewhere and have a certain set of kit and, you know, go and join in with other people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. You can build exercise into your daily life, you know, and just like a good diet, which is what Rosemary's talking about, which is sensible. So is good exercise. It can be built in. It doesn't have to be you've got to go to the gym. It might be get off the bus one stop earlier. It might be that you walk, you know, in your case, just a wee bit further with the dog.
Yes.
You know, and you give yourself those kind of targets. And when you achieve them, those physical targets, they really feel rewarding. So it's not about, you know, doing what Rosemary did and run a marathon. I'm not suggesting that. But if today you find walking or exercise difficult, just set yourself an easy task. You know, today I'm going to walk 200 yards. Tomorrow I'm going to walk 300 yards. You will feel really good because the human mind likes to reward itself. You know, if you get 400 yards, maybe you can have that donut Rosemary's talking about. But, you know, I think you have to really, once you start doing exercise as a daily part of your life, you'll feel so much better. And what I can remember through menopause, I mean, I was at the time playing very heavily competitive squash. And I remember it was quite challenging at times when, you know, because what we know, and one of the big studies we're doing in football is we're looking at the impact of periods on performance. Because periods generally have an impact on athletic performance. So helping athletes manage that period or that menopause moment is really important to their success as an athlete. And I think we're learning more and more and more about how important it is to help individual athletes manage that. And as Rosemary will know, an awful lot of that is managing their diet and changing the way they're dieting and changing the way they're exercising. So in certain period, in certain part of the month is a good time to be doing strength type work, and another part of the month it's not.
Gosh, that's really interesting. So, yeah, and Julie, is that the same for menopause, that there are either different times? It's harder to track, isn't it? Are there different times when exercise is easier to do or harder to do? Did you find your own experiences of menopause whilst training professionally and competing at that professional level? Did you find that slowed you down tremendously, or was everybody sort of in the same boat?
It's managing it, I think, and realizing, that there were certain days I went to compete, and to be honest, the last thing on God's earth I wanted to do was run about on a squash court. My stomach hurt, I didn't feel great, or I got hot sweats. I had a lot of the hot sweats we talk about. I certainly had disturbed sleep, so I was always fresh and ready to play. And again, I think it's a little bit like the aging process. You have to learn to manage that. You have to say, I have to give myself permission today not to do what I'll perhaps set out to do. And I think it's giving yourself permission to understand. It's rather than pushing it away and trying to hope it'll go away, it's actually giving yourself permission to behave differently based on how you're feeling. And being in touch with that is really, really important, I think, as you get older.
Very true. Anita, I think we lost you for a nanosecond, but we were just talking about, in your experience, have you come across any tool or tip or tactic perhaps that helps, particularly women having a tough time through menopause?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, it's about the sort of awareness of the different kinds of symptoms that are out there, and just keeping an eye on things, and, you know, not struggling in silence. I think that it's really important that we enable people to feel that it's okay to have a dialogue and not feel that, for example, they're going crazy. And definitely, you know, tracking things, certainly when you're going through the perimenopause, looking at, you know, how your cycle's changing. I think that period tracking apps can be really great, when you're sort of looking at what's going on, because we're all really busy, we don't necessarily keep that much of an eye. But yeah, when it comes to, you know, when you're getting more menopausal symptoms, definitely have a chat with your GP and see if there's anything that you might want to do, in terms of medication to help. But, you know, you just can't overemphasize the importance of, you know, the basics, you know, reducing the amount of caffeine, for example, that you're having. If you're having a lot of hot flushes, that can be really important. Alcohol, you know, is often people think that's a great way to sleep, but actually it's a bit of a false economy. It will definitely disturb your sleep more. And, you know, sleep, it's just the best medicine in the world, I think.
Rosemary, what about you? We were talking actually, in fact, Anita, you mentioned it as well. We were talking about before this whole thing started tonight, we were talking about how women have this fantastic way of just kind of word of mouth, whispering cures and treatments and things from one to the other. Now, I mean, HRT has had quite a bad rap over the years, but it seems to have come in from the cold. And I just want to ask the panelists what their thoughts are about this. You know, what do we feel is helpful? Do we feel HRT is helpful? Have we kind of accepted it back into the fold, if you like? Anita, let's start with you.
So I think that, first of all, disclaimer, I've never ever been paid by an HRT company. I think I may have had a free pen once, but I do not get paid. The pen significantly changed my life. No, I mean, you know, as doctors, we don't get paid to prescribe particular drugs. It's not how it used to be. And for me, the most important thing is that my patient makes the decision that they feel comfortable with. It's not about what I would do or what I think. And that's where education comes in, because you need all the information in order to make the right decision for you that you're going to feel comfortable with. And of course, HRT can have risks. And I think it's only the risks that we tend to hear about in the news. And when newspapers are reporting about the side effects, there's very little conversation about the real benefit that some people can have. And, you know, you hear about people who, you know, for example, their careers have been completely changed because of the menopause. And if it means that somebody can go to work, then that's something that's really fantastic. But what I would say is that, you know, there's so many different kinds of HRT, and there are things that are safe for one person that may not be for another person. And I think also the thing that often we hear about a lot in the press is about breast cancer. Now, if we look at the risk of breast cancer in a woman who is in her 50s, so between 50 to 59, we know that in 1,000 women of that age group, there's 23 cases of breast cancer. Now, if you use the combined HRT, so that means HRT with estrogen and progesterone, which you need to have both of them if you still have your womb intact, so if you haven't had a hysterectomy. So we know that if you use that kind of HRT, you get 4 more cases, so 27 per 1,000. But what's quite interesting is that actually, if we look at people who drink 2 or more units of alcohol per day, we get 5 more cases of breast cancer. Smokers is 3 more cases. If you're significantly overweight, then we get 24 more cases in that age group. But what's really interesting is that when we look at people who actually exercise for 2.5 hours a week at least, we get 7 fewer cases.
Wow.
So I think there's so many things that actually, you know, people may not be aware is actually really significantly impacting, you know, their personal risk. And so I wouldn't like somebody to not take a medication without knowing their risks, but also what they might be able to do to reduce their personal risk. And I think that's so important. So, you know, it's difficult because you see scary things written in the newspaper, and often people say scary things about things they've heard that have happened to them. very few people talk about how fantastic they think their HRT is. But, you know, I think it's weighing up the risks and the benefits, and it has to be something that's really personal. And you need to have that one-on-one conversation with whoever's going to prescribe your HRT. So your GP, clinic in the hospital where we have menopause specialists, you know, find what's suitable for you. And definitely consider the alternatives. There are lots of great non-hormonal alternatives, but you know, if you want to explore all of them, then we definitely need to look at HRT. But it's a non-obligation type of scenario. When you go to see your doctor, you shouldn't feel pushed into anything. Please do the thing that you feel most comfortable with.
Now we've got time for one more question to the panel before we start answering. We've got so many questions. I've just put my glasses on and I can actually see what's going on in the question and answer bit of the screen, because that is one of the worst things about getting older, I think, by a mile, is that your eyesight just falls off a cliff. But there is, you know, you touched on something there, Anita, which I thought was interesting, which is this sort of scaremongering about HRT. There's a lot of scaremongering, though, more to the point, about aging in general, and we talk a lot about the negatives, and it's no, you know, it's no wonder we talk about the negatives. I think we do need to talk about the negatives, particularly when you look at how as a society we treat some of our older population, a lot of our older population. But what are the positives about aging? I mean, you know, when I think about my own life, I really liked I found my late 40s and my early 50s were a great time to sort of think about where I wanted to be going, where I wanted to be heading, what I wanted to be different, and, you know, perhaps sort of think about plans for the future that I'd like to have. Rosemary, what nice plans or positive thoughts do you have about getting older, and what do you think is the biggest selling point about getting older? Perhaps when you know, talk to some of your clients or patients rather about age generally, what are the sort of positive things? Because we do focus so much on the negatives, don't we?
I mean, it's interesting because I think it's very different for everybody. I think because a lot of women have children much later now. So actually, when we're talking about aging, a lot of women are just starting out on motherhood. And so for them, that's a whole world of, you know, that whole journey is ahead of them when they're 45. So I think so some of my clients I'm talking to, you know, obviously you know, I have a lot of menopausal clients, you know, but a lot of them are going through menopause with a toddler, which can be quite challenging. But so I think, you know, for me, aging has, you know, I had my children younger. I had a career as a model younger. So I went back to school when I was 32, when most people, as Anita is saying, has been a doctor for almost 10 years by the age she was 32. You know, I'd gone back to school. So for me, what I have to look forward to is, you know, I love, you know, I've been doing nutrition now for 10 years. You know, you know, for me, it's an exciting career. I love what I do. Everybody really wants to talk to me about, you know, everybody's very interested in health and wellness and, you know, trying to make the best of whatever their world is. And that's what I really believe. It's not sort of change your life, but let's make your body cope with your life as best it can. So I think, you know, I don't know, I suppose we do live for longer. We can mother later, we can work later, you know, so there are lots of things I think are, you know, when they say 40 is the new 50, I think that probably is true. You know, they say that about every decade, but I think I do think, you know, when I look at what my mum was like at 45, she was she wouldn't mind me saying that, but she was a much older 45 than I think 45-year-olds are now. So yeah, so I don't know, I don't feel any different to, you know, I feel like I've got a lot of years left to me.
So I want to ask you about that as well, but also thinking about, you know, well, actually let's stay with that first of all. What are the positives about getting older as far as you're concerned?
I think professionally, I think the joy for me now is the ability to share. I won't call it my wisdom because it'd be very arrogant, but because I'm not sure I've got any, but to share what I know, to be able to support younger people to grow, evolve, develop. In other words, I guess I've stopped striving for me and started to realise that my role now is to pass on some of that knowledge to support my colleagues to be the best that they can be. And I've always fundamentally been a coach. That's what I've loved doing in sport. But as I've got older, I've really settled into the feeling that You know, I'm really comfortable watching and seeing other people develop. I don't have to prove myself to anybody, including myself, anymore, but I do want to help others evolve and develop. So I found that really joyful. And I'm sure I haven't got children, but I would think that's like parenting. You know, you start to see and give your children that support to evolve and be all those wonderful things that you want them to be, and sharing that knowledge that you have of life and what you've done. But I also think there's a sort of peace comes with it for me. I found it more peaceful. I don't have to chase about, I don't have to prove anything, I don't have to be the best person on the squash court, I don't have to be the best anything. I'm quite comfortable with being who I am. And I think as you get older, that's really important, that you enjoy who you are. Stop trying to, you know, whatever you were striving to do. It's a wonderful time for reflection. You know, I notice things now as I'm older that I probably haven't noticed for years. Like I was out with the dogs this evening and the sun was shining, and, you know, I stood for ages looking at all the trees change colour. You know, I used to be so damn busy, I wouldn't have noticed the trees change colour. I'd have run past them at speed, trying to get to the next thing, you know, I'd got to do. So there's something joyful about pausing as you get older and taking that time to look around you and enjoy it. So I found it really peaceful. I found it, you know, and very enjoyable for me.
And perhaps very liberating as well, to kind of let go of that sense of self and having to prove oneself, and, you know, just to be completely in the moment without all external pressures. That must be really very liberating.
Can I just
I think it is. I know, sorry, Rosa, go on.
No, I was just going to say there's one thing that I've been meaning to say actually about aging, which is that one of the things that they found that really helps our telomeres at the end of our chromosomes, which is what helps us to, you know, is our anti-aging, is meditation and taking time to reflect, which ironically, when we're in the midst of things, we never ever do. And actually, you know, so the meditation apps and things like that actually really help. So what you're doing is exactly what we all should be doing.
You're just doing it without even thinking about it, which is even better. Sue, just to stay with you for a second, you once said, I think it was on Desert Island Discs, I think, you once said the great sadness about one's parents is you don't often appreciate them until they're gone, which really resonated with me, because I don't have my parents anymore either. What did you learn from your parents, or perhaps from an older person in your life?
Well, I mean, everything I am, everything I've been, everything I've done is absolutely because of them. And I think I said on Desert Island Discs, and I actually used the music, that they gave me the music of my heart. And what I meant by that was they gave me the most wonderful love of the outdoors. You know, that feral little girl was never, you know, if I wanted to go ice skating, they took me ice skating. I want to do tennis, you know, I was hopeless at it, but they took me to tennis. You know, go swimming, I was as skinny as a rake and I'd freeze to death in the pool, but they'd take me. You know, they allowed me to be. But the other thing they did for me, they were both wonderful with people. They were both really, and I absorbed that. I can't say I intellectually understood it, but I absorbed their love of people. And that has stayed with me all my life. So it's something I try to pass on. I don't know if you can when they're not your children, but I try to value every individual in the way I felt valued. And I guess above all else, they gave me confidence to be who I needed to be in the world. I could tell you so many funny stories, but I haven't got time tonight. But, you know, wonderful moments where they just believed in me. And I came away from, you know, I wasn't good at school. I was pretty naughty. I got into a lot of problems and scrapes and all the rest of it. But I was given the belief that I was okay. And that stays with you all your life. And if you can give a child that, you know, what's that American poster say? You know, when you die, no one will know what size house you lived in or how big your car was. But if you change the life of a single child, you will be remembered. And I think that's why parenting is so wonderful and such a fantastic opportunity to give young people a foundation where they can, you know, roots to grow and wings to fly, my dad used to say.
I love that. Thank you. Now, I'm going to be in so much trouble because we have all these questions and not very long to answer them. So, okay, I think this one might be for you, Rosemary. I take a daily vitamin. Is there any evidence that vitamin supplements for the over 50s, which are considerably more expensive, are needed? And actually, that's that totally makes sense to me, because also there's a whole new selection of vitamin supplements that are available now, specifically for menopause, for different phases of our aging. So can we, I guess, make do with normal vitamin supplements, or do we need special ones, or is it a case of what are the guidelines for getting the best vitamins at hopefully not too expensive prices?
Okay, well, I would say that supplements is an area where you get what you pay for. But having said that, I would also be really aware, if you're taking a multi, I think, you know, make sure that I see lots of people and their guts aren't working very well. They, you know, they need to work on their gut a bit more, because if they're taking supplements, it doesn't matter what supplement you take. If your gut's not working, then you might, it's not what you it's not what you eat, it's what you absorb that counts. And if you're not absorbing properly, then you can spend a fortune on supplements and it won't make any difference. So it's almost worth going to see somebody who knows what they're, you know, like me, or, you know, a doctor, and just check that everything's working fine. But I definitely think supplements are an area where you get what you pay for. I tell you, there are some really, go to a good shop where they have good advice and good nutritionists working there. And also I mean, with an over 50 supplement, when it starts getting, you know, if they're using it as a sales pitch, then just be wary that they're not, you know, that it's not like that where they say superfood and then you pay £2 extra for that. But I would definitely make sure that your gut is working properly. You know, do you have bloating? Do you have a problem with your bowel movement? You know, are there any signs that there's something not quite right? Because if that's the case, then go and sort that first and then get on with supplementing if you need it.
Thank you. Anita, one for you. Enjoy your 40s and early 50s, ladies. Best time for me. After 60, I'm finding it harder. Dry vagina and aches, not great. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, it's this kind of, we think that we have to put up with all these symptoms because we're getting older. And certainly, yeah, I mean, dry vagina, lots of things that we can do for that. Lots of really safe options as well. And actually the best thing can actually be, for example, a topical estrogen or a vaginal moisturizer if you're not able to use hormones. So there's actually lots of things that we can do. And I really strongly believe that we shouldn't be putting up with a dry vagina. And certainly another thing that I think we don't talk enough about is sex after the menopause. And often I will have a consultation with somebody and that won't be something that they'll bring up with me, and I will ask, and then they'll say, oh yeah, but you know, no, not yet. Okay, you know, it's something that we can do something about. And I think that there's a lot to be said for the dialogue that we have when it comes to sex for pleasure and sex as we get older. It's not something that you have to stop doing. And again, that's something that I think as doctors we need to get better at bringing up. I know a lot of my colleagues don't necessarily bring it up, but I certainly always do, and it's very important, and we shouldn't feel embarrassed to talk about it. So yeah, lots of things we can do. Everyone's menopause is different, and so the type of symptoms that you have will really dictate what kind of treatment options are available for you.
Thank you. One for you, Sue. Is it ever too late? I've not looked after myself properly and abused my poor body and deprived it of exercise for most of my life. I didn't write this, by the way. But I put it on. She says, I'm 41, and I'm definitely didn't write this, and became a mum for the first time last year and want to be around for as long as possible for my daughter. So she's got
never
a great...
never too late. Never too late.
What would you recommend? How can you turn it round? Can you? And how the best way?
Yeah, absolutely you can. I mean, you're not going to set out thinking I want to run a marathon or play in a netball team, but there's a whole set of, netball has these come back to netball groups where they play. We do walking football. If you don't want to join a group like that, You know, just going out for a walk, taking a bit of time every day to take some exercise. If you don't want to go out and do that, get yourself some, you know, videos and do a little bit of exercise in the house to music. Find a thing that makes it enjoyable. Don't make it a punishment. You know, if you start to make exercise a punishment, then you're not going to do it. It's got to be like doing. You know, I love moving to music. You stick a piece of music on now, I'd be up and going, right? So if I want to do some extra exercise, I just put some music on. And I mean, the dogs think I'm crazy, but I'll be dancing around the kitchen and I'll be doing, you know, do what you're comfortable doing, but bring joy into your life with exercise. Don't make exercise some sort of penance. So
I think it's a really good tip, because I think that's where some of us went wrong, you know, as kids.
You're all for PE teacher.
I didn't want to bring it up to you, because I know you used to be a PE teacher, but I hated PE lessons with a passion. So I kind of, you know, I do feel, but I think you're right. It doesn't have to be a penance. It can be fun. It can be.
It can. Just find the thing you enjoy doing. You know, try swimming. Go down to the swimming pool. You might not like it. You might be very self-conscious to begin with. So do something in the house. You can do it. It's never too late. And, you know, the greatest thing of all is exercising, having fun with your daughter. You know, take the ball out in the back garden, kick the ball around, you know, start to do things with your daughter, learn with her. You know, as you get older, learning is fun. So go out and learn something new, you know, get some roller skates, go wild.
Just hope I don't fall and break something. Okay, another question here. What can you advise for me, as the menopause has caused me to lose my zest for life generally? Who wants to answer that?
Anita.
Anita.
Well, you know, I think that all of us together, you know, have the combined expertise to answer this question, because it's not just about one thing. It's all about having a holistic approach. So whilst sure, I can advise you in terms of medications, but it's so important to, you know, speak to someone like Rosemary, look at what you're doing in terms of your nutrition. I mean, we all need to be more Sue. I mean, she's just life goals. I mean, you know, what a woman. But, you know, it's just so important to look at all aspects of your life. And you know, you can't change something without doing lots of little things in multiple domains, I think. And so it's just so important to be really holistic and look at everything.
But can I just say also, if for many women, it's a time of life when literally everything is coming at you like a juggernaut. You've got, you know, for this age, I think you've often got parents who perhaps aren't well, or they're not with you anymore, or you've got children that have just turned into kind of, you know, teenagers, and there are all the wonderful things that come with that. So there's like a lot of things happening in life, just, and you know, generally relationships sometimes suffer a bit at this age, and I think sometimes we perhaps are a bit quick to put everything onto hormones, because, you know, hormones are obviously very important, very relevant, but it's also about, you know, this kind of big kind of convergence of events, isn't it, sometimes? Would you say that was true?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, you know, you're right. You can't let your hormones rule your life. And I think, again, it's about sort of opening up that conversation about, you know, our women's health with our friends, and talking about what's going on. You know, I texted a friend who I hadn't spoken to for a long time this week, and I said, "How are you?" And she said, "You know what, actually, I'm not really that great." And it just, you know, we're British. We always have this stiff upper lip. We say everything's okay. Sometimes it's actually just, you know, saying, you know, things are not that great. And you know, with social media as well, everyone's life looks, you know, perfectly rosy and filtered, but we're only seeing the best parts. So I think actually, if we're really honest with ourselves and you know, the people who are close to us, will, you know, I'm not saying that makes it better, but certainly knowing that you're not alone in what you're going through, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah. Now we have someone whose birthday is today. Happy birthday. And she is 60 today. And she was wondering whether we had a few words about, you know, can we cover older women as well? And we've also had a question from someone who's asking if you can still get HRT at age 64. And Anita, I mean, from my limited understanding, you can take it forever now, right? Is that right?
Yeah, so there's no limits for how long you can take it for. It all, again, this is individualized and depends on safety for your personal case. Now, in terms of when you start HRT, there is potentially some slightly high risks in terms of cardiovascular, so thinking about things with heart and strokes when we start it at an older age. But that's a conversation that you do need to have with your doctor about what's going to be safe for you, looking at your personal risk factors, but also exactly what are your symptoms, because it may be that actually it's something that, for example, could be treated with a topical estrogen rather than like a patch or a pill. So again, it's looking at what exact symptoms are there and what we can do to help you, but what else could we potentially try as well, and what's going to be safe for you as an individual.
Sorry, Anita, there's another question which I think is very interesting because it's been in the news quite a bit lately as well. But are there any new surgical options for pelvic organ prolapse? Because we all know about exercises, and there are other things like biofeedback trainers and so on. But obviously, I think for a lot of women who are suffering from this, they'd like something a bit more permanent, but also safe. And sometimes I think mesh implants, I believe, have had quite a bad rap on this lately. Is there anything that you know of, like what would be for you, to your way of thinking, the perfect solution, or as close to perfect as we can get? Matt,
Yes, and
if you have a second to explain actually what the prolapse is. Anyone under 30, put your hands over your ears. And it's a little bit scary.
It's not just older women, and this is the thing, that we are seeing more and more younger women, and it's not just something that you can have after you've had a baby. It does. So prolapse means that the pelvic organs start to fall down. So this can be the womb coming down, or the vaginal walls collapsing. And this can cause an uncomfortable sensation, pain during sex, and also problems with your bladder and bowels. And so this is something that can, for some women, be treated with pelvic floor exercises. And certainly the first step is always to see a physiotherapist to actually make sure that you're doing them correctly, and make sure that the diagnosis is correct to start with, because not all pelvic floor problems, not all incontinence, for example, is actually a pelvic floor issue. Sometimes it can be overactivity of the bladder muscle. Now, mesh is something that has been used previously for surgery for incontinence. So it's used as a way of sort of hitching up the bladder. It's not something that we're currently doing because of the fact that there are some safety issues in terms of people having problems with erosion and a lot of pain after having the mesh. So it's not something that we're doing at the moment. There are other operations that we can do which are not using mesh. So any operation that you're offered at the moment for a pelvic floor problem would not be using mesh, because certainly to my knowledge, we're not allowed to use it, and certainly in the centres I work, we're not using it at the moment.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time, which is really upsetting because there's so many brilliant questions here, and I'd like to really thank you so much. Stay well, stay happy, and stay healthy, everyone.